Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about some watercolor techniques just because I had a couple of people say that they were interested in doing watercolor potentially for one of their projects. And I just wanted to give you guys basically a demo on all the different techniques if you're not comfortable with them, and I'm actually going to be introducing quite a few new ones. So if you guys have a nice watercolor paper, it's nice and dense, what I need you to do is, one, write your name up on it just so you can practice and I know that it's you. One box, about 1 inch by 2 inches or a little bit bigger, wet on dry, label underneath. Another box is called wet on wet. Next one over here is bleeding. Next one over here is salt. Next one over here is a wet brush, a dry brush, an experiment with mask, and a blend. So there's two different types of brushes that you guys can use. If you look at this one, it's actually like a really dark hair. This one is typically softer and it's really good for watercolor, but pretty much not anything else. This other one, it now looks dark because I have it all watered up, but it's normally like an orange color. This is a fake hairbrush and it's called Taklon. It's also really good for watercolor, but also really good for getting a fine point and detail. This one's just kind of flimsy, but it's really good at holding water. So when you guys are starting to work, make sure that your brushes are really wet. I personally prefer the Taklon because it just kind of goes all over. I'm going to start on my wet on dry because this needs to have two different layers. So that means I have to allow it time to dry. So I'm going to grab my first color. And if you guys are working with the watercolor cakes, please, if you have the prang, make sure that you guys are giving it plenty enough time to get enough water in there. Because oh my goodness, that prang stuff is really sticky if you leave on too much of the pigments of the watercolors themselves. I'm running out of water, so let's add a little bit more. Finish out the rest of it, make it nice and smooth. And then I'm going to let that one dry. Next one is wet on wet. So I'm going to pick another color, do a layer of wet. And unlike the other one, which was wet on dry, I am going to go straight over top of it. This is one way that you can go over top of it with another color and just kind of see how it bleeds into the next one. But at the same time, you're focused on a shape, but you're not going to actually focus on bleeding itself. So I just kind of let those bleed into one another. With bleeding itself, what you guys are going to want to do is take a clean brush, make sure you clean it out, wet your entire area that you need, pick out a color you want, tap it down, and you're just going to keep tapping. And all these little fingerlets are going to keep coming out and bleed into your area. You can also tip your paper. It doesn't really help too terribly much if it dries. If you got a nice good paper like it's supposed to. But this helps you get those really cool little fingerlets. Now my paper's already starting to dry. So I'm going to re-wet that area. Grab another batch of color and let it start bleeding. And you can see that that's really flowing by itself. The more pigment you add, the more it's going to keep flowing. That way you get these really nice organic lines and fingerlets that come out. They're really cool. Okay, with salt, we are going to wet our area one, but more like a wet area that we're putting on. So we got to go grab a color, and I actually got to go grab some salt, so let me go do that real quick. Okay, so when you guys are working with salt, just like I said, you're going to have a really wet area. So get a nice wet brush. Pick out your color. I'm going to do, it's better with darker colors. So I'm going to go try this nice rich blue. Fill out my area. And you notice when I'm doing edges, I'm locking my wrist and then pulling. And that's how you get those nice edges. Another thing that you can do later, we'll talk about this technique, it's called masking. There's different ways how to do it, and that'll also help you if you don't want something to turn a certain color. So with this all nice and wet, I'm going to go over it again real quick just to make sure it works. I'm going to put a little bit of salt in my hand and then just drizzle it on top. Do not do a ton of it because it like clumps up and dries and then it doesn't end up working. But you can see that that is starting to get a little bit darker right there because those are actually starting to absorb the color. That's exactly what you want. So we're going to tap this off and let that dry. Okay, with our wet brush, this is just a general wet brush technique, so your brush is nice and wet. Grab a color. Oops, a little bit more water. And then just see how it looks whenever you have a wet brush. And then grab a completely separate brush that's dry. You also don't use as much water if you're using cakes. So you don't sit there and like grab a ton of it just to make it moist. I just put a little bit of water on it and then I walk away. So I'm gonna go grab, this is starting to work, that'll be good. I'm gonna grab a little bit of this red. And you notice that it has like these little sections that it just leaves out. And that's just because I have this really nice dry brush. And it also leaves a little bit of texture behind. So if I kind of zoom in on it, you can see that it kind of almost looks like fur. This one's nice and smooth and this one's like fuzzy. Okay, with the one next underneath it, we have blending. So you're going to start with one color on one side and then we're going to blend into another color. This also requires a lot of water, so make sure your brush is nice and wet. I'm going to do blue and a purple. So do about half and half. Okay. You go right on that edge. You can see that it's already starting to go a little bit by itself. Clean off my brush and then rub right in between the two and just keep going back and forth until your colors have this nice transition in between. You can do it a couple of times, clean out your brush, go back over it, smooth it out. And that looks really nice. We have a nice solid blue all the way over into our purple. Now with the mask, there's a couple of different ways how you can do this. One, I can go buy some Frisket, which is basically, it initially starts out as a liquid plastic and then it dries. You paint over top of it when it's completely dry and then you can actually pull it up later and it leaves the white of the paper. It's really cool. If you don't want to do that and you just know that you want to keep that as a white of your paper, you guys can use these crayons. So I'm going to just draw something really simple. And with the wax of it, we're kind of using our science, that ends up repelling the water. So wax repels water. I'm going to paint over top of it. And you notice that that wax is just pushing it right off. You can even feel like how your brush drags over top. That's exactly what it's doing. It's just pushing it away. There we go. And with your experiment, you do anything that you want. Mix pencil with it, add markers, anything like that. But if it is wet, make sure that you wait until it's completely dry before you put another material on it, just because you don't want your paper to tear. That's also like really important. Okay, so my wet on dry is actually pretty dry now. So I'm going to go grab another one. And this is a great way to add details. Like if I had a tree and I was doing bark, I would lay down my brown first and then I would come back over and do that tree texture. So I'm going to pretend to do that right now. I'm going to pretend that I have leaves on this tree because we have this nice green. I'm going to add a darker green to it just to see if I can show you the texture of the leaves that pop through. So I would come back through here and I would do this, just so I can see like the density of those that are different. You can go back in with a drier brush and you can even blend them out. They don't have to be such a hard line if you don't want them. You can let this layer dry. You can do even more details on top of that. It looks really neat if you guys do that, because you can kind of see now that I have this nice texture going on. Do a nice layer over here, layer over here. Just keep blending it out more and more. Grab a little bit more. Another one over here. Got rock music now. That's funny. Okay. So you can kind of understand it. The more layers you add, the better it's going to look. So I can come back later and let's see. It's almost dry already at the bottom. I'm going to let it go for a second or two more. Maybe I'll draw some twigs through it. Grab a different color. So maybe these are the branches that are showing a little bit. Oh, that was a little bit too wet. But you guys kind of get what I mean. You can see a little bit of the branches showing through. Definitely wait until it's all dry because it's tough. Should have also gotten a skinnier brush. That's okay. So then it looks like we actually got a forest going on. Okay. So now that is all done and complete. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, need any help, I would love to help you out. Wait until this is completely dry, and what you'll do is you'll take your hand like this and just gently rub that off, and then tip over your paper and then dump it on the floor. That way that salt will rub off and it'll look like little star pinpricks on there, and it's really cool. If you guys have any other questions for me or need any other help, please call me over. Our next video is me actually applying these techniques onto an actual picture. This will be for my practice example for our holiday pictures. So if you guys want to use watercolors for it, I definitely suggest that you practice this first. And then if you need any help or anything like that, or decide that you want to use a different material, just let me know. You don't have to use watercolor. It's not like, that's not a requirement. I just want to make sure that these look nice, so it's whatever material that you guys are comfortable with. So, thank you guys and have fun.